What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. One of the best parts of the Pokémon world is that sometimes, out of the blue, certain creatures might see a vast improvement in some form, like a new evolution or regional variant, or inclusion in a new generational gimmick in some way. However, I think it's safe to say for every Pokémon like Quillfish or Stantler that really needed to have some sprucing up, there were some Pokémon that were doing just fine that stole the opportunity from someone else that was crying out for help. So let's take a look at the top 6 Pokémon who were undeserving of attention. Number 6. Gen 1 Repeats. So the most obvious choices are the likes of Pikachu, Charizard, Mewtwo, etc. So instead of wasting the whole list on similar points, I'll just group this crop together and talk about how so many successful, popular Kanto Pokémon seem to constantly get the spotlight that other Pokémon desperately need a lot more. Franchise mascot Pikachu obviously first got a baby stage, then in Alolan form, and then unique Z moves into Gigantamax form on top of everything else that it gets. So did it really need all of that? Or of course there's the legendary Mewtwo that seems to get excess treatment a lot, and then there's definitely Charizard who has so much going on, and actually the other starters are fairly overrepresented as well, even though they're super popular, compared to other Pokemon like Volbeat or Shuckle that are horrendously neglected. Is it really fair that Gengar gets to have a Mega and a Gigantamax form when already being so beloved and constantly in the spotlight, over a Pokemon like Luvdisc who gets punished just for existing? So I think it's safe to say that any Gen 1 Pokemon that has received repeated special treatment when they've already had some creates a huge imbalance in the Pokemon world. But that imbalance could be fixed if you partake in today's sponsor, Red Pro Club. This retro Game Gear retailer sells old video game hardware from varying generations that they've refurbished to the point of being like new. Just look at their 3DS, specifically the new 3DS XL. They completely restore the old consoles such as this and make them like you pulled them straight out of the box, without any smudges or scratches. And perhaps the best part, they come preloaded with so many games already. You would have to pay hundreds of extra dollars to get your hands on all of the games included here. So that alone would be worth the price to some people who have never gotten to play these before. Like the multitude of Mario and Luigi games that came with the system to help me get ready for Brothership coming soon. So you can go to redproclub.com today to use the promo code EmperorCubone for 10% off your order of refurbished hardware with complimentary games right now, and then maybe you could give some more deserving Pokemon a shot on your team. So then, number 5, Yamask. This one still perplexes me as much as when it first happened, because it was my understanding that Cofagrigus was doing just fine, if not quite a strong choice for battle since it does have high defense on top of Ghost being a good defensive type, so it'll last a while, and frankly Pure Ghost is still a rarity so it made very little sense to get rid of it. But that didn't stop them from making a Galarian Yamask anyway. Firstly, they should not have called it Yamask since the mask part isn't even there for this Pokemon anymore, but just because they hadn't invented convergent ideas yet, I guess we got stuck with a Pokemon whose name doesn't even make sense as the worst example of dropping the ball on names since they failed to give us Snowshrew. And of course, Runerigus, aside from having the most ridiculous evolution method of all time, could have been its own separate Pokemon. A possessed slab with a snake on it could have been Ghost and Dragon or something, but instead they decided to make a Cofagrigus knockoff when the original was still in great shape. Not to mention they made Yamask lose an eye when it evolves now, which seems a bit cruel even if it is already dead. So Yamask seems like a poor choice to pull from Unova when they still had the likes of Swoobat, Crustle, Maractus, and so many others. But an even odder choice because it basically didn't change anything, even down to them having an identical ability with just a different name. But I guess that pretty much sums up the Pokemon Runerigus as a whole anyway, so I guess it fits. Number 4, Slowpoke. Now just to make it extra clear, I really love Slowpoke, or more specifically Slowbro, but I'm keeping my bias in check and looking at it objectively, because Slowpoke has had just about every form of special attention that you could think of. And listen, I'm not even saying that Slowpoke doesn't deserve something, but having a new evolution, and then a Mega Evolution, and then a slew of regional forms on top of that? That's way too much. I mean, that's more than some of the fan favorites that we complained about earlier, putting Slowpoke on the same level as Meowth, who's had multiple renditions, but Slowpoke hasn't kept up its relevance with constant appearances as a core member of the anime, so where does all this Slowpoke clout come from? If this had just been Slowking or Mega Slowbro, or even both of those probably, I wouldn't bring it up. But the triple shot of regional variants is so much extra on top. Like I said, Slowbro is one of my favorites, but he's also really good in battle already, having massive defenses with a move pool so vast that you would think it was a normal type. And then Slowking is just as useful, except for the whole Mega thing, I guess. The last thing we need is to give these well-off Pokémon even more opportunities to show off, new signature moves and abilities included. But even what we got was undeserving, because if you ask me, they went about it all wrong by simply defaulting to the existing evolutions. Like, how is this still a Slowbro when the Shelter moving is enough to make it into a Slowking? Also, how is this still a Shelter? And don't even get me started on the separate evolution items, purely so they could roll them out one at a time. Slowpoke did not deserve to evolve so ridiculously just for a publicity stunt. So not only has the Slowpoke line gotten handed more than most other Pokémon, they couldn't even really have this overload of attention do justice to this exceptional line. Number 3. Goodra. If there were 3 major categories fans care most about, it would most likely be the starters, the legends, followed closely by pseudo-legendaries. This is a class of very special Pokémon that are worth the rare find because of their heightened stats and usually beneficial typings, although nowadays that's generally just something mashed together with Dragon. That is until Goodra. Sure, Dratini and Dragonair were pure Dragon, but Dragonite got the flying added, so Gen 6 was the first time that we saw a monotyped pseudo-legendary. And it did shockingly well, even in the face of Kalos bringing in the new Fairy type, with Goodra having poison attacks in tow. But seemingly out of nowhere in Legends Arceus, we saw a new split starting at Sliggoo, where they can gain the Steel type. Now, we have seen Mega Evolutions for pseudo-legendaries, so that would be one thing if Goodra had a Mega form, even though they pretty much ignored all of the Kalos Pokemon for that. But a whole separate line is a bit much, I think. I mean, what if Bagon got a whole new branch, or Larvitar? Granted, you might think that the Goomy line is a bit too boring compared to most of the others, but giving them Steel of all things, which is easily one of the best type combinations in the whole series? So even if you think there was a requirement for attention, they buffed it a little too much by adding on a move like Shelter to boost its defenses and its evasion. It just seems to me that even if Goodra were the undisputed worst of this specific category, it would still outclass a lot of other Pokémon that would kill for that kind of clout. You're telling me that Goodra was in more dire need than Spritzy or Heliolisk or Carbink or any other Gen 6 choices? Literally, the only other Kalos Pokémon to get a Hisuian form was Avalugg, who really did need it, but that actively made it worse. So Goodra is indeed on a special pedestal for some reason, when it was already standing on the shoulders of lesser Pokémon just by nature of it being in such a special class already. Number 2. Chimecho. I never really had a strong opinion on Chimecho. If anything, it was just lost in the crowd of Hoenn one-offs, or levitators, but it was totally fine. It got a nice profile boost from James having one in the anime, but nobody in the history of the world was asking for it to get a baby stage. I could see the argument for buffing Chimecho, that would be fair, but they only gave it a weaker form. So how exactly does that help the Psychic Wind Chime? And they made it so convoluted to evolve, being both happiness and time-based, that there are still people that don't even know that Chingling and Chimecho are related. And the weird part is that there are Pokemon from Hoenn that easily could have used a baby form, like Zangoose, Seviper, Torkoal, or especially Tropius, so I'm not sure why Chimecho was the first thing on the list, because it obviously was not a benefit to the Pokemon in any way, besides maybe some cultural reference, I guess. So there were still better candidates from Gen 3 to get some attention, and definitely some better ones for a baby, because Chimecho was far too middle of the road for any of this before, yet is still too middle of the road now, so it's basically all a wash if you ask me. Number 1. Duraludon. Of all the Pokemon that have received extra attention, Duraludon truly baffles me the most. As far as I could tell, this durable dragon was a perfectly respectable Pokemon. It's a solid standalone offering for late in the game. As we said already, it's got one of the best typings possible, and surprisingly, its highest stat is its special attack, which you would not expect. If anything, your complaint could be that it's too hard to find, but I feel like it pulled off the loner dragon thing much better than either Drampa or Turtonator. This probably could have been the end of a line, honestly, but if you did think that there was something missing, I feel like any creative shortcomings were addressed when it got a Gigantamax form that turned it into a building. I feel like that was a pretty effective culmination of the ideas around Duraludon, to have it become a living skyscraper and nobody thought it needed anything more. I mean, all of the other Galar Pokemon with Gigantamax forms were the end of their lines, so it made sense. But that's not the end of the story, because only one generation later, for some reason, they saw fit to give Duraludon a full evolution. Archaludon is such a strange idea, because a bridge seems like a step down from a building, or at the very least a lateral move, and the Pokemon seems to have less mass than before, making this thing look overall weaker and frail, and surprisingly similar to a staple remover. But I guess maybe that's to lower your guard, because given Duraludon's already incredibly high stats, its evolution could only go up to 600. I mean, it didn't have to. I guess they could have used the same rearranging that happened from Scyther to Scizor, but no, instead Archaludon is the only Pokemon with a 600 point base stat total that's not a legendary, mega evolution, or pseudo-legendary, and you would be forgiven for thinking that Duraludon might have been a pseudo-legendary already, but it's so strange to me that they didn't think these things through and had to revisit their own work so soon after it premiered, from Gen 8 to 9. There were some other Galar Pokemon to get some sprucing up as well, so it's not unique to Duraludon, but the Alloy Pokemon seems to have been doing just fine compared to the likes of Pincurchin, Ice-Q, Indeedee, Thievul, or even Stonejourner. If you're not getting the point, let me explain it like this. We had a Pokemon that was the ace of the final gym leader, with 10 resistances on top of a 115 defense, that can now use the Eviolite. Was that really necessary for a Pokemon that was already outshining so many others so effortlessly? But those are just some of the Pokemon that I find undeserving of their special attention. Be sure to check out redproclub.com and use the code EmperorCubone to get 10% off of your gaming necessities today. Which Pokemon do you find least deserving of their post-launch updates? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.